So at the end of my internship, I published a 3,000 word internal
Wow.
memo. So it was essentially just highlighting, like the lived experiences of being
Right.
a racial minority in Facebook's London office.
Hello and welcome to the AOU podcast, where we talk about entrepreneurial leadership in Africa. Whew. It's the beginning of a very engaging and very interactive sessions that we'll be having with African leaders within the AOU space, and also as well as around the continent, within the world. Last week we talked about entrepreneurial leadership. So we defined it as the 5 Ws, where we talked about what entrepreneurship is, why we engage with it, where we should apply the skills that we get when we learn about entrepreneurial leadership, and who is the entrepreneurial leadership meant for, and who exactly is meant to be a part of the entrepreneurial leadership concept. But this week we're talking about intrapreneurs, so within, right? And the concept, from what I understand of it, is that somebody set up something and now they need someone to continuously innovate within that establishment. Today's guest is Arinze, with over 20 months, impressive, 20 months of experience working with 5 industries across 6 countries in Europe, North America, and Africa. Sir, I am in love. All right, so today's topic, we're going to be talking about the value of entrepreneurship. So I'll allow our guest to introduce himself and give us a brief background as opposed to the very impressive stats I have on here.
Okay. So hello everyone. My name is Arinze. I'm a founding student from Nigeria. Well, soon to be graduate. So a bit of like about me. So I'd mentioned that I'm from Nigeria.
Right.
And then so it's in 20 months that I've been working in the different places. I've had the opportunity to work at a couple of Fortune 100 companies like Sanofi, Bank of America, and Facebook. And I think during my time at AOU, my self-identity has evolved from, I came in seeing myself as as an entrepreneur, but then I think as the years went by, I realized that my strength actually lies in entrepreneurship, which is one of the reasons why I'm very excited about the topic today.
Great. Anything else?
No, is there anything more you'd like to find out,
I don't
Savannah?
know, man, but let's get into it. So, while the focus has been majorly on entrepreneurship and entrepreneurial leadership, rather, we equally require entrepreneurs with entrepreneurial spaces or establishments or companies, because they run the essentials of building the entrepreneurship and putting out those skills and concepts towards the people that they're working with as well. So maybe you can tell us what entrepreneurship is to you, or maybe we can start from scratch. What is entrepreneurship to you, and how does that bring in entrepreneurship within your understanding of that?
Right. So I think I think when people think about entrepreneurship, like they immediately think about employees just doing like monotonous work.
Yeah.
But I think it involves like a degree of innovation and the application of entrepreneurial thinking within the context of an employment. So your second question was why it's important?
How do you think entrepreneurship gets into entrepreneurship?
Right. So I think entrepreneurship gets into entrepreneurship in the sense that entrepreneurship is essentially an internalization of an entrepreneurial way of thinking, of an entrepreneurial way of acting, and just of seeing of seeing the world. And I think a fundamental part of that is the perception of problems or challenges as opportunities.
All right. So if that's the case, then why do you think we should care about it in this day and age?
Right. Because then, well, from the basics, while the entrepreneur is important, and the whole concept of entrepreneurship is crucial, an organization would not run, at the scale that it should, if it's just solely run by by an entrepreneur.
Yeah.
The entrepreneur needs employees to run the company.
Sort of like build on the innovation
exactly.
that's in it. Okay.
Which is one of the reasons why I personally get very annoyed when I hear, this rhetoric, typically by people like Gary Vee,
Right.
who are like
Name dropping. Okay.
no, who tend to condemn like the whole 9 to 5 thing. It's like, oh
Right.
yeah, you should be an entrepreneur. Like if you're doing a 9 to 5, you're a failure, blah blah blah, and all that jazz. But like I think where the entrepreneurs come in is that they help the entrepreneur to take the initial idea out of their heads and implement it in ways that would not only achieve the strategic objectives of of the entrepreneur, but help the company in itself grow. Yeah.
All right. Quite interesting. Is that your 20 months of experience talking?
No, not yet.
A key question that comes in that, because you've definitely talked about how the 9 to 5 is condemned and how essential being an entrepreneur and an entrepreneur in an entrepreneurial space is essential. How have you applied that in your experience
Yeah.
within the industries that you've been in, from the 6 countries in Europe, North America, and Africa?
my goodness.
I will keep name dropping and accolades, my guy. Right.
So how I've applied it. So I think for me it's it's been like a bunch of like things, right? So in every place that I've worked, I've had to work within certain constraints.
Right.
And an entrepreneur also faces constraints. It could be capital, it could be talent, it could be just any kind of constraints. So I've had to work within that. And just like an entrepreneur, I've had to take risks.
Right.
So risks with like how I approach a problem, or people are involved in like a project that I was
Can you
working
give
on.
us a personal example?
Most of them are confidential, unfortunately. But I think where I can give an example is probably so like the part of like constantly looking for ways to make a thing or like a place better.
Right.
Because it's like the underlying idea of entrepreneurship is you see a problem so you see a problem and you try to solve it, or you see a gap and you try to fill it. So it's just
Right.
so you're trying to make things better.
Okay.
So recently at my internship at Facebook, I had to deal with just this whole thing of like just being a racial minority, or something that's very fairly new to me, because then that was my third internship in an international space. But I think I didn't expect it to be that bad.
Right.
So it was a situation where out of like 230 interns, there were just 2 Black interns, and then one was British, or Caribbean,
Right.
British. So I was essentially the only American intern in London. So at the end of my internship, I published a 3,000 word internal memo.
Wow.
So it was essentially just highlighting, like the lived experiences of being
Right.
a racial minority in Facebook's London office.
Right.
And how that affects, like first of all, like your psyche as an employee / intern, and then how that affects your productivity and the quality of your work.
Yeah.
And then I ended that post with like a bunch of recommendations. This is not something that your typical employee or your typical intern would do.
Yeah.
This is something that somebody who is constantly looking for ways to make a place better would.
And also like
Exactly.
put an impact for that problem. So a problem was found. You were a minority.
Yeah.
Very, very much a minority in that space. And you're looking for ways in which you can solve that and make the space more comfortable for other people that are going to be coming in within the Facebook London space. So enough about entrepreneurship, or we can talk about it, but we can
just weave it into the rest of our
we can
conversation.
ease into getting to know who Arinze is, because you are our guest.
Okay.
And what would you wish you knew when you were starting off your professional journey?
Yikes. Wait. I think what I wish I knew is that a lot of people in like positions that we think are grand.
Right.
They're essentially more human than we think that they are.
What do you mean by that?
So it's a thing of like, so when you think about somebody like Zuckerberg,
Right.
you tend to think about like some mysterious
Being that's just at the
founder,
top.
exactly,
All right.
and who is unreachable or like, but when you think about how human these people are, not only does it like make you see it as more of a possibility to work in the spaces that these people are
Right.
in, but then it also increases like your ambition to think that you can someday become a Zuckerberg or even greater than Zuckerberg. Because I think when I started in my first year, I had very 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 low self esteem.
Right.
So I was asked to be pitched to one of the big three consulting firms for to be interviewed for an internship, and I turned that down to be interviewed for a record label in Nigeria. Not that record labels in Nigeria are shit, but like I just didn't think that I was good enough,
Right. Okay.
to get through the process of the of the consulting firms recruitment thing.
Yeah.
But like I think as I had more internships after that, and I met with more people and I had more conversation, I started to see myself in a different light, and probably I would like develop more more confidence. And like I think just one internship at a Fortune 100 just kind of led to the others, because then the confidence just kept growing.
Right.
I just kept going.
From what I'm understanding of what you're saying is that you had to learn and unlearn things in the process of, building your professional journey. And on top of that is reduce or change your narrative of scale or your understanding of scale. So you've moved from a Nigerian record label company to like Facebook, and where else have you worked? Boom and
Bank of America.
yes, and where else?
Sanofi.
Exactly. So how was the transition from like maybe the Nigerian record label to like big corporate companies such as like Facebook or Bank of America?
All right. So I think so the transition, I think so it kind of like exposed me to problems that I didn't think I'd have to confront.
Right.
So, for example, like I'd never been in a space where, like I said before, like where I was a racial minority. So I think this was my very first internship at, well, not very first, but like at my internship at Bank of America. I think that was the first time that I had worked outside of the continent, and I was
Right.
in a work environment where not a lot of people looked like me, and like that was just like a
Culture shock.
exactly, because I felt like I had never felt as black as that in my life. Well, up until then, and then I think when I now had my like the other internship later that year in Frankfurt, it was even worse, because then I could go an entire day without seeing a black person,
Right.
so I felt even blacker, right? So like I think each internship just kind of like exposed me to different sets of problems, and like I think as I moved from the record label to these to these companies, I had to confront this imposter syndrome that I never thought I would have to deal with, because I always
Yeah.
thought it's imposter syndrome, what I can get the whole thing of like not not being confident in yourself, but feeling like you're undeserving to be in a certain
Right.
space.
Okay.
I never understood that until I experienced it. It got to a point where I went back home. This has happened on 2 consecutive nights. I went back home and just cried myself to sleep.
Oh.
It was probably like the most emotionally turbulent time in my life. And then I think that was ironically the time that people felt, oh, Arinze is living his best life.
Right.
But I was going through a lot. But yeah, so like I think, or like the challenges that I've had like with every internship has come with its own problems, and I thankfully have grown from the process.
I think I experienced the same thing when it came to my internship with Goldman Sachs. There was training in Ghana, and I felt like it was too intense. But at the end of it, I was like, that wasn't so bad. But those 3 days that felt like 12 to 16 hours just talking to the same woman,
Yeah.
I would go back to the hotel room and just cry my eyes out in the bathroom, and then come out and be like, whew, okay, let's thank God that we have this opportunity.
Yeah.
What can I do to better myself and all this, and to tie it in, to tie it back into like entrepreneurship. It takes a lot of like looking within to find that problem within you that you didn't think was there, and like innovatively, innovatively have sort of a space or a mindset where you can think of how to better yourself, how to better the situation for you, and how to make yourself more comfortable in the other people around you as well. So let's segue into the next question, or the final question rather. So how can institutions or companies on the continent or even outside provide conducive environments for people who can't reach their potential or don't know what their potential is? I mean, you talked about the 3,000 words that you wrote at the end of like your internship. So aside from that, how can people actively talk about or have these conversations about, making it a more inclusive space to allow people to like reach their potential?
I think, and like I hate to use this term, but it's I guess like the one that is most appropriate. I think it all comes down to the extent to which the environment itself is psychologically safe.
Right.
So when you create an environment where people do not get chastised for their opinions,
Right.
however different that they are, I think you create a space for people to actually have a real to have a real conversation about things that matter to them. And like I think when people feel like they might be judged,
Right.
it causes people to hold back a lot of things, and it also causes them to not do a couple of things, because then they would constantly be dealing with this idea of like, oh, so if I do this or if I say this, this person might act this type of way. And then the result of that is you never actually get to see what is inside this person's head. What can this
Right.
person actually do? And then like I think there's this whole thing about the power distance thing. So I think the shorter the power, distance, like the more
The less of a hierarchy.
exactly.
Or like flat management type
Exactly.
situation. Okay. Yeah.
But then, like the flat management thing needs to be done. I think very carefully, because then it can easily lead to like chaos or just
Right.
multiple. So there's the institutionalized leader, and there's a couple of like charismatic leaders that
Right.
are popping up here, and they're grouping people in like in factions.
Yeah.
So I think it needs to be done very very carefully. But I think the easier that people can walk up to anybody in the organization with like an idea that they have, it's like I think the quicker it will be for people to be able to reach their potential, and I think it will probably help like the company as a whole to be more innovative.
Right. Our producer just added one more question, and he wanted to know, what does an entrepreneur do? An entrepreneur do, in your opinion?
So an entrepreneur constantly looks for ways to do things better within within an organization. An entrepreneur is constantly looking for ways to either identify new opportunities or capitalize on existing ones. So the entrepreneur is essentially an entrepreneur that isn't exactly in the driving seat
Right.
of the organization. They might be in senior management. They might be all the way down to the interns. But what matters the most is the mindset, and how they approach problems or challenges that they face. Like I think that is typically one of the defining, well, a couple of the defining characteristics of entrepreneurs.
All right, great. Thank you so much for being with us. Do you have any last words or advice that you might want to give as an entrepreneur, or just as a person with 20 months
Oh my
experience?
goodness.
Working in 5 industries
Oh my
across
God.
6 countries. Wow. guys.
I think probably I people should not underestimate their own potential, and they shouldn't underestimate the power of their voice. Because when you underestimate your own potential, you've already done what the rest of the world is doing. So if you on your own, so you've set a ceiling for what you can achieve,
Right.
or what you can do, then what's the world going to do?
be
Like, it's
like,
like they're gonna push you even further down, right? And then, like, I think the thing about not underestimating like the power of your voices, I think most people tend to shy away from saying a couple of things. So in situations where they identify like it's like they've seen that this thing is explicitly wrong,
Right.
but then first of all, like, they might be afraid of what would happen if they speak up about it, or they might be like, it's just me, like no one's gonna listen.
Right.
But then, like, I think if people actually like just speak, right? Because like if I was to go back to the example of the memoir I published at Facebook, before I published it, I got so many oh my god, you shouldn't do it.
Don't do it. You don't know what the reaction is and all that. Yeah.
Because then, because like at the end of the internship thing, so like so all the interns find out whether they're getting whether they're getting a full-time offer or not. So like, oh yeah, like you need to keep your head low to get this offer, or like you should wait till like Friday, it's like your very last day to publish it. And then people like, oh no, this is going to ruffle a couple of
shake
feathers.
The tables, Arinze. Shake the tables.
So it was just a lot of like, oh yeah, like you shouldn't do it.
Right.
But then I did it anyway, because then like
it was something that was bugging you.
Exactly. And then I was like, yes, I might be an intern, but these people are gonna hear, like they're gonna hear what I have to say. Even if it's just one person that reads that piece, that is fine. And then I was thinking to myself, like, if it would take me not getting, so it's take like the prospect of like me not getting an offer, if just that can silence me, then I do not deserve this opportunity that I have. Because like I think, because I saw it as it's like my role there was to speak about these things, to open more opportunities for Black people to work at a company like Facebook. And if the idea of just not getting the offer was big enough to like just keep me mute, then the internship itself, I didn't deserve it. The offer, I didn't deserve it. But like I said, so I published it. It eventually went on to be the most trending post, internally for like the rest of the day. It got responses from
your voice was heard.
Exactly. And so like there's currently things on the way to specifically recruit more Black, so like more Black interns and people from other minority groups, because
I think we experienced the same thing at Goldman Sachs as well. The CEO came in, because there's Goldman Sachs and Goldman Sachs International. So I believe the CEO of Goldman Sachs International came in, and somebody asked him, like, why don't we have Goldman Sachs recruiting people in East Africa or Central Africa?
Oh, yes, typically West Africa is like Nigeria and Ghana.
It's generally, what we hear is Nigeria and Ghana, right? You never hear someone from Kenya. Like, people were shocked, like, you flew all the way from Mauritius? Wow. What happened before that? Like, did you take a boat or something? I'm like, let's evolve, please. Let's evolve. You're in an international space right now.
Yeah.
Let's have the mindset where that even if I'm from the smallest country in Africa, you still know that there's some sort of progressive development that's happening, or that we're not limited in resources, and we don't walk around with lions as our pets and all that. So definitely, I agree with you. Do not underestimate your voice. Always look into being an entrepreneur, outside being an entrepreneur. And thank you so much for being with us today.
No worries.
This was the AOU podcast, Entrepreneurial Leadership in Africa. We will be seeing you in the next podcast.